Hi everyone! Today I'm going to be showing you how to paint many different types of stars to add those starry skies to your galaxies, nebula paintings, Milky Ways, nighttime scenes, all of that. So we're going to be using lots of different tools, and you don't have to have exactly what I have. I'm just going to show you what I have, and you can find something similar to try and mimic the technique. So the first thing that is important is some white paint. For my preference, I like to use Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed-proof white. It comes in a jar like this, and it acts very much like white gouache. It is opaque and it sits on top of your watercolor, which will help the stars pop through the sky. If you don't have this, you can use gouache. Some people even use acrylic, but I highly recommend getting a jar of that. The brushes that I'm going to be using will vary. I've got one round brush here that's a size 4 that's very pointy. If you don't have these small brushes I'm going to show you in a minute, find yourself the pointiest brush you have to do some of these star techniques. I also have a very tiny spotter I'm going to use. This will help make some really fine lines. This is a Kingart. This was a silver brush limited black velvet. The brand doesn't matter so much as the shape we're looking for here. And then I have a script liner. I find the script liner is useful in different ways than those other 2 brushes, so we're going to use a size 1 script liner. And then we need a brush that's rounded instead of a pointy brush. This one's more rounded. This is a mini mop, although you could use any round brush that doesn't have a particularly pointy end. You could use a filbert, you could use different shapes. And this one we're going to keep dry. We're only going to use this for some dry brush effects. So I'm going to set that one up here so I don't get confused. Now we come to our not so conventional tools. You will need a toothbrush. You will need something pointy. You can use a toothpick. I like to use my Cricut weeding tool that I use with vinyl because I can hold it like a pen. But a toothpick works well. Anything else pointy, it doesn't have to be sharp and pointy, just pointy to get be able to move the paint around in a very specific way. I'll show you later. And then we've got an extra fine soft pastel in white here. If you don't have soft pastels, sidewalk chalk works well as well. And a Q-tip or a cotton swab or anything that you can get into a tiny little point like this that's soft. So take a paper towel, roll it up and use the tip, like the little corner, something like that, to mimic the effect that a cotton swab would give you. You do need some kind of painted page, or you could use black paper just to mimic a sky while you practice your stars. I'm just using this galaxy painting that I started but never finished. So what we're going to do first, I'm going to cover half of it up so I can show you the difference. First, we're going to use the toothbrush method. Some people prefer this method, some people prefer the next one. It's just a matter of your style. So what you're going to do is get the brush a little bit wet, just a little bit, shake off the extra water, get a little bit of paint on it. As you can see, it doesn't have a lot. In fact, that might be too much. There we go, so that it's not globby. Very little amount of paint from my jar of bleed-proof white, and then I'm just going to hold it in my hand, put my thumb on it, and spray the stars. You get a very fine misting of stars to be the background stars for you. And that's it. If your paintbrush is too wet or if you put too much paint on it, you'll get bigger stars than that. I like little tiny stars. Now we're going to do the other half. And we're going to do this with the paintbrush method. So take that pointy brush that's kind of small that I showed you in the beginning, We're gonna get a little bit of paint, and for this you need a little bit more water. I like to use the lid to mix. I'm gonna put a little bit of water to thin it out just a bit, and make sure that I scrape my brush so it doesn't get too wet, so we don't have big globs of stars. And what you're gonna do is hold that brush, get any other brush, and just tap the brush with the paint on top of the other brush to make your splatter. I prefer this method because I find I can have more control, changing the angles, getting the direction, putting a little bit more stars in one area than another. But again, personal preference. And there we have it. Now both sides have those background stars. For the first section, we're going to see what happens when you put a star on top of a wet area of your painting. Usually I would do this before I put that spray of stars on, but for now, I'm just going to make a little puddle in the middle there. And then take some of my bleed-proof white and dab it right there. And let it dry, just like that. Once that section is dry, we're going to come back with our smallest brush. For me, remember, that's my really tiny spotter. And we're just going to put a circle in the middle of that spot. And this is going to be one of our glowing stars. Sometimes you can put more than one, kind of make it a cluster there to create that starry background. This is what happens when you use that wet technique underneath your dry stars. I'm going to do it one more time. You could also use your pointy brush to put that star in the middle. The idea is to give it a strong, bolder highlight there. And if you want, I can show you what happens when you put a little bit of stars on top of it, like I normally would do this first. Kind of blends it in a little bit more with the sky. The second technique I'm going to show you is going to be using our white pastel, our soft pastel. And yes, my nails get star splatter on them all the time. So we're going to take that pastel and we're going to make a little circle. Then we're going to take our cotton swab and just blend it in. Again, this is just to create that glowy space feel. So kind of go around the edges to get it really blended. Then we're going to take our paint and dip it in the middle. Creates a similar technique to the wet technique I showed you before, but it's totally dry. It's a little bit easier to do on top of the star splatter, the first step we did, because there's no water to spread that around. There we go. Gotta have the right paint on your brush. And again, you can do multiples. Sometimes those clusters are glowing, or maybe a star trail. You want to do a constellation. The next technique I'm going to show you is going to use our dry brush. You can see that there. Remember, it doesn't have to be a mini mop, but it can be any sort of rounded brush you have. So what we're going to do is take some paint with our little brush paint ourselves a star, like that. And then with the dry brush, you're just gonna kind of blend it around. You may have to wipe it off a little bit. I like the way it gives a fuzzy edge instead of a blendy edge. Then we're gonna go ahead, put another star in the middle of that. The nice thing about this too is that you could do it in more of a line than a dot too if you wanted to. Kind of create that star shape in the sky with your dry brush. Just really smudge it around. And then add some stars. Here again, it looks like we have a cluster. Maybe they get smaller as they get further from the middle. Next, we're going to start working with our script liner, or if you don't have a script liner, a very pointy brush. This is just my personal preference, and we're going to make a sparkly star. Start by creating as light of a touch as you can, a vertical line, and again using as light of a touch as you can, a horizontal line. I find sometimes that I prefer to hold my brush in one direction to get that really pointy end. So I often find myself moving around the way I hold the brush to get the right angle. Then we're going to add a star in the middle that the sparkle is coming from. I will show you one more, and this time do several angles of sparkle. I do find it helps if your brush is slightly dry. The wetter the brush, the harder it is to control the really fine lines. I will show you what it looks like to do a really tiny one too. Sometimes I like to vary and have big sparkly stars and then just a little tiny one in the sky somewhere. A couple little tiny ones maybe. For this section, I'm going to show you how to use your pointy object. I'm using my Cricut weeding tool from my vinyl craft supplies. You could use a toothpick or any other pointy, but not too sharp tool you might have. You want a dab of paint that is very full of pigment. And you want it to kind of sit on top of the paper like a little ball, because you're going to take your pointed object and pull the paint out into fine lines. I find that this is helpful when you always seem to have a brush that's too big for the fine lines you want. Really helps you get those tiny lines of star sparkle. I will show you one more time. And finally, I'm going to show you what it looks like to combine several of these methods. So we're going to start with the pastel. Putting a star on top of that. And then using the pointy tool to make it sparkle. Just a little bit for this one. And you can see that one didn't have quite enough paint in the middle. So I'm going to add a little bit more, another dab. And I should be able to pull it out a little more nicely, yeah. I'm going to do one more for you using the wet method and the script liner. So we're going to put a wet spot here for the paint and let that dry. And then use my script liner to put a star on top of it.